Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some days you feel totally in control of your emotions, and other days it is like a roller coaster? Well, this new study dives deep into what makes us better or worse at handling our feelings. So, what is emotion regulation anyway? Think of it as your brain's way of managing your feelings. It is about knowing when you are feeling something, choosing how to deal with it, and then actually doing it. This is super important because when we struggle with this, it can lead to all sorts of mental health issues. The researchers in this study wanted to figure out what makes some people really good at this, and others not so much. They call these moderators things that can influence how well we regulate our emotions. They looked at a few key things: mindfulness, how our brains process information, our cultural background, and even our basic psychological needs. They thought that if we can understand these moderators, we might be able to develop better ways to help people struggling with their emotions, especially young adults who are going through a critical time for emotional development. To get a handle on this, they used a model called the Extended Process Model of Emotion Regulation. Imagine it like a step-by-step process. First, you feel something. Then you decide if you need to do something about it. Next, you pick a strategy, like trying to think differently about the situation or distract yourself. Finally, you put that strategy into action. This model helps us see where in that whole process things might go wrong and how those moderators could step in. Let's talk about mindfulness first. You've probably heard of it. It is about paying attention to the present moment without judgment. The researchers believe mindfulness can act in two ways. One way is like a direct tool, where being aware or accepting a feeling is a strategy itself. The other way is more subtle, where mindfulness components like awareness and acceptance can actually change how we move through the emotion regulation process. For example, being aware might help us label our feelings better, while acceptance could help us react less intensely to tough emotions. Then there is cognitive functioning, basically your brain power for things like attention and memory. This is super important because controlling your emotions often involves using the thinking parts of your brain, like the prefrontal cortex. If your attention is all over the place, or your working memory is overloaded, it is harder to manage those intense feelings. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. They also looked at context and culture. This means things like how your culture shapes what emotions are seen as okay, or how you are expected to deal with them. For example, some cultures might value harmony and encourage controlling your emotions to avoid conflict, while others might prioritize personal expression. They also considered psychological needs, like feeling autonomous, competent, and connected to others. When these needs are frustrated, it can lead to poorer emotion regulation. To test all this, they used a few different methods because no single way of studying emotions is perfect. They used a behavioral task where people were shown stressful or neutral situations and asked how they felt and how they regulated those feelings. This is like a high-resolution look at their emotional responses in a controlled setting. But they also knew that real life is messier, so they used something called Ecological Momentary Assessment, or EMA. This is where participants got pings on their phones throughout the day, asking about their emotions and what was going on around them in their actual lives. This gives you a sense of how people regulate emotions in the wild. And to really get the full picture, they even did optional interviews with some participants to hear their stories about what emotion regulation feels like and what challenges they face. This adds a human touch to the numbers. So, what did they find? Their main goal was to see how these moderators influence emotion regulation. They predicted that mindfulness would lead to better emotion regulation, like being more flexible and using better strategies. They also expected that stronger cognitive skills would help with the different stages of regulation for culture. They thought values of harmony might lead to disengaging from difficult situations. And they hypothesized that when psychological needs are frustrated, people would have more trouble regulating their emotions. They ran a pilot study first to make sure their task worked well, and then they recruited about 100 young adults for the main study. This group was designed to be diverse, with a mix of genders and visible minorities, to make sure their findings could be as broadly applicable as possible. For the data analysis, they used some fancy statistical tools, like mixed effects regressions. Don't worry too much about the jargon, but essentially these methods are good at handling data that is collected over time. And from the same people, they wanted to see if the moderators they measured predicted how people regulated their emotions. Now, for the exciting part, what did the results tell us? While the paper doesn't detail every single finding, it strongly suggests that these moderators do matter. For instance, the study likely found that individuals who reported higher levels of mindfulness, better cognitive functioning, and greater satisfaction of their psychological needs tended to have more adaptive emotion regulation strategies. This aligns with their hypothesis. They probably saw that things like being able to focus your attention and having a sense of control over your life make a real difference in how you handle stress and difficult feelings. The cultural aspect is particularly fascinating. The research points to how cultural norms can shape the very goals of emotion regulation. If your culture emphasizes group harmony, you might learn to suppress negative emotions or avoid confrontation, which is different from a culture that prioritizes personal authenticity and might encourage expressing emotions more freely. The discussion section is where the researchers really talk about what it all means. They emphasize that understanding these moderators is key for early intervention, especially for young people who might be developing mental health challenges. If we know what makes someone's emotion regulation stronger or weaker, we can tailor treatments to target those specific areas. They highlight several strengths of their study. The emotion regulation task they designed is innovative, using realistic stressors to get strong reactions. They also really focused on ecological validity, meaning their methods try to reflect real-world experiences as closely as possible, both in the stimuli they used and in how they collected data with EMA. This makes their findings more likely to be relevant to everyday life. The implications for clinical practice are huge. For mindfulness, they suggest treatments could better focus on the active ingredients that actually help with emotion regulation. For cognitive function, if certain skills are found to be particularly important, cognitive training might become more targeted. And for culture, it underscores the need for culturally sensitive treatments that respect diverse ways of managing emotions. But like any study, it has its limitations. One of the main ones is that they recruited from the general population, so only a portion of their participants likely had significant mental health conditions. This means direct application to clinical populations might need further study. Also, the EMA part of the study involved quite a lot of daily surveys, which can be a burden and might affect how consistently people participated. They also used brief mindfulness practices, not a full course, so the effects observed might be short-lived. In conclusion, this study is a really important step in understanding the complex world of emotion regulation. By using multiple methods and looking at a range of moderators, the researchers have built a rich dataset that can guide future interventions. The takeaway message is that our ability to manage our emotions isn't just about willpower, it is influenced by our mindfulness, our brain's abilities, our cultural background, and our fundamental psychological needs. This research really shines a light on how we can develop better ways to support young people's mental well-being. By understanding these moderators, we can create more effective, targeted interventions that help everyone navigate the ups and downs of life with a bit more grace and resilience. It is a reminder that when it comes to our emotions, there is always something new to learn about ourselves and how we can grow. What do you think about these findings? Does it surprise you how much culture or psychological needs can influence how you handle your feelings? Let me know in the comments below if you found this breakdown helpful. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science stories, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.